I wonder, when you left school or uni, how you pictured your future career. Whether you picture it as like a steady rising line of increased salary and increased fulfillment and rising to the top on a steady line process. Now, for most of us, I've got to tell you, it may look a little bit more like that. Which is like a cross-section of the New Zealand Alps, where you leave and you start and you get your first job, you get a job, you're excited, and then it's a little bit less exciting than you thought, they said at the interview. But then things go well, you get a promotion, oh dear, the job doesn't work out quite so well, the job changes and you think that's it, life sucks. My son gave me that one, excuse me. I'm going to resign. Okay, so you get a new job, great excitement. It's all looking good, you promise great things, that doesn't work out quite so well, and so on. And if you haven't had any setbacks in your life yet, well, you're probably living in a bubble which will burst fairly soon, because for most of us there's going to be setbacks in our working life. So tonight I want to talk about setbacks, promotions and patience. I can't remember the order we said we'd do it in. And what I don't want to try and do is try and be prescriptive and say, oh, this is how I did it, this is how you do it, because that's not a good idea. Because each of us has got to work out before God how we handle setbacks and what God wants us to do in our workplace. So what I do want to try and do in a few minutes is to highlight some choices that might face you if you are not happy in your job, or when the first setback occurs. What questions you might ask yourself as you make those choices. And then thirdly, to look at some biblical principles that can guide us in those choices. Now, when we talk about choices, let's put this in context. If you and I have a choice about what work we're going to do and where we're going to do it, we are in a very privileged part of the world's population. Most people don't have that choice. Most people don't have that choice. My parents' generation mostly didn't have that choice. My late father worked for the Dunlop Rubber Company. He joined at the age of 14. He had very little education. He worked for 48 years for a single company and retired. And he lived through 2 world wars and a Great Depression, and he was just happy to have a job. And so that's a different culture that we're in. A friend of mine who's a senior HR manager for an international corporation said this to me. He said, careers used to be like railway trains. You get on at the station when you leave school or uni, you ride the train to the end, and you get off at a station called retirement. He said, now they're more like cross-country 4-wheel drive vehicles. You're zigzagging all over the place, going where you will and when you will. And this desire for mobility seems to be increasing with each successive generation. A company called Kronos Australia published this report last year. I'll quote, millennials are going to quit twice as fast as their elders. No matter how much money and attention is lavished on them, as soon as they feel, this is obviously a generalisation, as soon as they feel they're not giving their best or picking up new skills, millennials will be off, staying an average 3.4 years compared with 5.8 years for Generation X and 7.3 years for baby boomers. So if you aren't getting the promotion that you think you deserve as fast as you can, if you're not happy in your job generally and you're experiencing some setbacks, what are the choices open to you? Well, number one, you can stay and try and deal with it badly. You can grumble. You can moan about your boss, moan to your friends. It's a bad way to go. It destroys your Christian witness and it just eats you up. Secondly, you can move job. And the grass always looks greener, of course, on the other side of the fence at first. But it isn't always the right answer, because obviously the next job is going to look more attractive at first. That's the way it's going to be pitched to you. A lady called Beth Cool wrote a little book called 5 Overlooked Steps to a Successful Career. She said this, little quote, in a world of instant gratification, patience and persistence may be keys to success. The positive effects of patience and persistence can go a long way in helping a person achieve success in business. When a new hire arrives to his or her first job, it's obvious there will be a learning curve until they become comfortable in their new role and master the tasks. Too often young candidates have unrealistic expectations about how speedily things progress in one's career. And then she makes this important point. But as a society, we benefit from recognising that some things require our patience, persistence and hard work. Great relationships, complex business ideas and change are not accomplished overnight. They require patience and persistence. And she finishes with this comment: some things are worth holding on and waiting for. Discernment is knowing which ones are worth it. That's where we need the wisdom of God. Now, Ray Turnus, a barrister, I believe, who spoke at this event almost exactly 12 months ago on this subject, one of 5 things I wish I'd known when I'd started in the workplace, one of his 5 was this: patience and hard work are required because success may come more slowly than you expect. Wise words. So those are 2 choices. You can stay and grumble, you can get a new job, or you can stay and change your attitude. That's the 3rd choice you've got. See, when you first start work, I don't know what your experience is, it'd be nice to share afterwards, I certainly was given a job to do which I thought was way below what I'd studied and worked so hard and graduated for. I joined, after working in the Game Reserve, I joined an international engineering firm, and they said, "Graham, we want you to clean up the library." I spent 5 days sorting out books and cleaning up the library. And of course, that was a bit of a test for me. A bit of a test. Later in life, before I retired, I had a boss who's a global COO, lived in New York, and her motto for her life was this. She said, "Love the job you do to get the job you'd love to do." And that's a great motto that she'd lived by most of her life. Whatever you're given to do, love it. And that, you know, under God's grace, you get the job you'd love to do one day. And Jesus said something similar, didn't he, in the parable of the talents, when he said this: "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much." So there's a real principle there. So those are the choices that face us when we're unhappy at work. Do we stay, feel sorry for ourselves? Do we leave? Do we stay and change our attitude? So, what questions might you ask yourself as you're facing those choices? I want to ask a question about the organisation you work for. Do you respect it? I think that's fundamental. I worked once for a joint venture company, and the parent company wanted to sell out of the joint venture company, and I was given the choice. Do I stay with the small company, or did I join the parent company? And I joined the parent company because I had more respect for them and the people in them than I did for the other company. I want to work, if I have a choice, for an organisation I respect, in terms of its values, its ethics, its culture. Do they value, for example, loyalty? I mean, a lot of companies say they value loyalty, but when the push comes, they don't. I have a friend who was a senior marketing executive for an Australian branch of a global corporate, and she received 2 emails over a 3-day period. The first email said, "Dear so-and-so, we want you to join the global network in our company of marketing executives. Congratulations on this appointment." 3 days later, she got an email which says, "Due to financial cutbacks, your services are no longer required." So this was a company that said they valued loyalty, but that was it. And I think, you know, that isn't something we need to face realistically. We're all 1 month's notice away, whatever it is, from that situation. My late father-in-law started working for a small family company. Of course, values can change in a corporation over time. If you start working for a small family company, you can walk in and see the boss, you shake hands in the morning, got taken over, then they got taken over again, then they got taken over again. And before long, he was working for some global corporation. He didn't have a clue what was happening. the whole culture had changed, and that can help. To ask questions about the organisation that you're working for. What are the bosses like? Do they try to live out the values that the company says it believes in? Secondly, ask some questions about yourself. Is my attitude worthy of the name of Christ? What is my attitude to my boss? Do I think he or she is an idiot and I could do a much better job? Given half the chance, do I undermine them and talk behind their back? You can ask questions about your own abilities. Am I as good as I think I am? Am I better than I think I am? You can ask questions about your values and motivation. What do you really value? There's a time in my life, in mid-career, when I was pretty unhappy, and I applied for another job, and I had the letter of offer, and I went in to see my boss and said, I'm not very happy about things, and I think I'm going to leave. And he sat back in the chair and he asked me a very wise question. He said, what do you want? And he wasn't offering to write me a blank check. But it was a very good question. What do I really want? What was the burr under my saddle? What was the thing that was really getting to me that I wanted to leave? Because, folks, when you examine yourself, it isn't always the thing that you tell your friends it is. No? You can say, I'm not happy, I want more money or something, but it really isn't about that. It's about the fact that you just can't stand the person sitting next to you, or you feel they're not valuing you, or there's no opportunity, or someone's broken a promise to you. What is it that you want? And that's a really good question to ask yourself. What do you want? Money? Title? Opportunity? Travel? Ask yourself that question. Be honest. If you've got a friend who will give you a straight answer to that question, you are very blessed. Someone who can give you a straight answer. And I think another question to ask is this: am I trying to find something in my work and career, a satisfaction that really can only be found in knowing Jesus Christ? Am I trying to put too much weight on my work, more than it can actually bear? I read the other day about Jack Higgins. I don't know if you've ever read his books. He writes Pulp Fiction. You get them at the airport in the bookshelves. Adventure stories. He's made a fortune. He said he was asked what he would like to have known when he was younger. And he said this, that when you get to the top, there's nothing there. Right? So that's a danger we can make. We can try to put into our work a weight more than it is meant to bear, that only a relationship with God through Jesus Christ can satisfy. Have a successful career without God in your life, it's empty. And I think also you ask questions about the organisation, about yourself, your motives, and ask obviously a question to God. What do you want me to do? As you pray through that. What is the right thing to do, Lord? So choices, questions. What biblical principles should guide us as we answer those questions and make those choices? Well, I could point you to all sorts of parts of the Bible to answer that question. But let me just focus on two verses. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12. Verses 1 and 2. Be very familiar to many of you. It says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. His good, pleasing and perfect will. And in those two short verses, I see four principles to guide our thinking when we ask and make our choices about work. Number one, the mercy of God. The mercy of God. As we go to work, let's not leave our sense of the grace and mercy of God at the door as we go in. Let's go remembering that we are forgiven people, that God has loved us and forgiven us, and we are forgiven sinners by the grace of God. That's foundational. Don't leave that at the door when you go to work. Secondly, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. When you wake up in the morning, when you go into the office, or whatever you're doing, offer yourself to God for the day. He's the ultimate boss. You belong to him. You're not any longer the master of your fate, or as the poet said, the captain of your soul. You have a new boss. You know, that perfume ad, I can't remember which lady's perfume it's for, one of the big ones, says, "This is for the most important person in the world, you." And, you know, that's what our society tells us. It's a lie. It's a lie. The most important person in the world is Jesus Christ, and he's the boss. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice to him. And then thirdly, the call to be different. Don't be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world. He calls us to be different and to make a difference. Now, when we used to employ people in the firm I worked for, we would always look for people who would make a difference. That was the phrase. People who would take us to another level. People who would add something really that we didn't have. Those are the real people we wanted. And I think God's looking for us to make a difference where he's put us in the workplace. How does he want us to make a difference? Whole stack of ways. I could just list some in the next minute or two. In our attitude, in our priorities. I love that Psalm 84 where he said, "I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than live in the tents of the wicked." He got his priorities sorted out. In your motives. Your motives. I spoke to a Christian lawyer in Brisbane a couple of months ago. She was about 30. And she said this, she said, "Sometimes I feel like my ambition is driving me rather than me being in control of it." Very honest statement about how we deal with ambition. But God calls us to be different. Different in the way we handle setbacks and disappointments. Now, folks, this is a big test. I had one major setback, which I'll speak of in general terms. I was in a fairly senior position, and the company, its wisdom, appointed someone over the top of me in a new role that was created. And I saw that as a political appointment, which was unnecessary. And I found that very difficult to handle. But prayed about it, I talked about it with my wife, and decided to hang in there and keep going. About a year later, a couple of the guys from our business came up to me and said, "You know, Graham, we were amazed how well you handled that situation." And I was very surprised, because I thought, well, if they could have seen into my heart, they would have known I didn't feel I was handling that very well at all. But by God's grace, that had an impact for good. And then it was a part of my testimony to handle that setback. I think different in the way you treat people, that's fundamental in the workplace. I do recall well a senior executive from a firm we were working with, and he was an elder in his local church, and someone said of him, who negotiated with him, said, "I can't believe that guy is a Christian." The way he treats people and deals with them. And it's a devastating thing to have said about you. And God forbid it's said about any of us by other people. I can't believe he's a Christian. God calls you to be different, and different in the way you deal with authority, even those you don't respect over the top of you, and different in the way you use authority. So when you do get the promotion, what sort of boss will you be? What sort of boss will you be? So those two things. First one, remember the mercy of God. Offer yourself as a living sacrifice. Be different. And the last one, he says, is be transformed by the renewing of your minds. So how does God make us different? How does God change us? He does it obviously through his word, as we read his word, and by the choices we make. But he does it by his Spirit, bringing us through tough situations. That's the reality. You know, if we spend a third of our life asleep, wouldn't it be nice if God did his work in us while we were asleep? You go to bed, a miserable, selfish sinner, and you wake up a loving, strong person. But it doesn't work like that, does it? He does his work in us where we spend most of our time, which is at work. And at home, obviously, but at work. I don't know if you've read Tim Keller's book on work, but in the forewords, there's a lovely bit by Catherine Leary-Alsdorf, his associate who works with him. And she said this: I started to see my work more as a crucible where God was pounding and grinding and refining, rather than a place where I was actively and effectively serving him. So we tend to think of it as, I'm going to go out there and do great things for God, and God bless us, may we do that. But equally, it's a place where God is changing us. And he does it so often, it's my experience, my testimony, through setbacks. Because it's at work, I have had to deal with difficult customers, ridiculous deadlines, stress, pressure, and disappointments. And it's in handling those that the grace of God works in your life. You think, do I really believe what I said on Sunday at church, that I trust God for my life? Do I really believe that I can trust him with my career? Do I really believe that? Because that's where it's tested, and it's in those experiences we learn patience, resilience, and trust. So let me close. If you have choices, thank God. Thank God. You're in a small percentage of the world. When you make those choices, ask some questions about the organisation you're with now or the one you're thinking of joining, about the people you work with or are going to work with, about yourself and your motives, and most of all, ask God for guidance. And expect God, ask God to transform you in your workplace, to change you, to help you be different. So may God guide you in that, whatever situations you're in. Thank you.